Captain America Brave New World came out last Friday, and we've seen mixed reviews, which might be a nice way to... I've decided to prepare my ranking of these movies. Now, I am excluding Brave New World. Disclaimer here, I've not seen it yet. But I wanted to share that for my first video. Where do I see these 34 movies leading up to Brave New World? Now, of course, the big question for this is going to be, what's my number one? So coming in at number 34, dead last on my list, unfortunately for them, is The Incredible Hulk. This is one that doesn't feel like it has much connection to the MCU. And frankly, you think Disney almost wants to erase this from memory, and we won't go quite that far, but it's only been 16, 17 years since they decided, let's connect something to that source material. So it's mainly got characters that I have very little interest in. It's got a forgettable plot. Most of what's going on is Bruce Banner just traveling through the world, trying to escape. Strongest bits were, frankly, him turning into Hulk, which they needed to do more of. That's really what everyone came to watch, is the Hulk. Acting wise, I mean, Edward Norton, he's had his better days, and the behind the scenes stories of this is nothing special. Tim Roth, I always enjoy, especially from Tarantino movies. You can kind of tell from the shots that this was made in 2008, especially doesn't have the impact that Iron Man had, being the first movie in the MCU. This is coming in number 2, and it just did not carry the same weight that, the MCU would have wanted. Coming in at number 33, we've got Thor: The Dark World. This came out slightly after Avengers, and so this is when the MCU board decided to get a little meddlesome with the creative control, and so Hela was the planned antagonist for this movie, and I'm sure it went through some changes. Instead, we got this lame mother Hemsworth, Hiddleston, their characters, Thor and Loki, of course, they had phenomenal chemistry. I always enjoy it. I mean, Loki, to me, is the underrated star of the whole universe, but even he could not save this movie. It's got forgettable plot. Again, those weakest of villains. Visual effects left something to be desired. I think you can do black and white shots. You can make something dark and gritty, and they put me in a dark place. So thank you very much, Thor. Coming in at number 32, we've got Iron Man 2. This is a movie similar to many other Marvel movies that are going to be further down this list. Just has horrible villains. So Justin Hammer is the evil billionaire, trying to be kind of similar to Tony Stark in that they're in very similar industries of work, but Whiplash was fine. And ultimately, at the end, the final scene, it's not even really between people, it's ton of drones and what Whiplash had programmed. So, a little bit of ingenuity, of course, there, but ultimately this is just machine against man, and I just do not dig that at all. We know who's going to win that every time. Setting wise, they did a really nice job, I will admit, at showing Tony Stark vulnerable, not quite yet to what you'll see in Iron Man 3, but emotionally, he's trying to separate Tony Stark from Iron Man. Coming in at number 31, we've got Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and this was a major disappointment, even in a run of movies where, as a fan, we almost should have expected that we weren't going to get anything too crazy with these. But this is really just, it's a struggle to watch, and I'm not probably going to want to come back to this anytime soon. So a few things of note: Quantum Realm, it's just a struggle of a setting to watch, probably 85-90% of your time in there. Very poor use of some strong actors. Paul Rudd and Michael Douglas really have little to do in this. Michael Douglas especially, you're kind of left wondering, what in the world is he able to do? On top of that, a lack of many of my favorite characters from the Ant-Man movies, particularly Scott Lang's ex-wife, Michael Pena and company. Those are like the backbone of some of the humor that brought into this. And now we got to talk about MODOK, and all I can say is, what the fuck was this decision to use him? Never need to see that in my life. Ant-Man and the Wasp in general, no meaningful development with these two characters. So I really, this is a waste of 2+ hours. This movie may end up being meaningless in the MCU due to the build of your villain being Kang. There were plenty of plans. There's an Avengers movie that was, going to be Kang Dynasty. So lots of big things happening. MCU can never have known. You can't have that foresight to know that, unfortunately, Jonathan Majors is going to get fired for unfortunate circumstances. But be that as it may, he's the main antagonist of this movie. Coming in at number 30, it's the Marvels. It's, something I appreciate, an attempt at trying something new. So something that I enjoyed maybe more than other parts of this movie would have been, especially the beginning. So first act, maybe a little into the second act, when they're fighting and they use their powers and then they transport, or teleport, I should say, to different places. So you got some very unique circumstances of Miss Marvel going into some new universes, Captain Marvel, of course, kicking ass and being pretty neat. Miss Marvel stole the show in this. Pleasantly surprised by that. Now, I was very impressed with her. Nick Fury's interactions with Kamala Khan's family, another highlight of this movie, but I wouldn't say there's a whole lot more than that. This movie's got poor villain. It's Dar Ben is her name. They actually have a decent motivation in this. I mean, they're trying to bring life, or at least like a better life, to the Kree people after the Supreme Intelligence was destroyed. Now I'm just going to show you this. I don't know what this brings. Why did we need a dancing, singing people? Coming in number 29, it's Eternals. I enjoyed the historical aspects of this movie. We get to see Babylon Babylon. You get to see 16th century Mexico with the Spanish invasion. I mean, this is all unfortunate, but really fun history to read about. And so on top of that, this film it's absolutely beautiful. There's really some breathtaking and stunning scenes. So the cinematography for this is really fun. Unfortunately, though, it's not going to save the fact that you've got a bloated cast, not enough time to develop any of these characters. And so, similar to what Ron Swanson might say,
never half-ass two things. Whole ass one thing.
They half-assed a whole lot of characters in this. Richard Madden's character is probably the most intriguing, even though I feel like you could see the heel turn coming a mile away. Primarily the main antagonist for this, and so for that reason, I've got this movie at number 29. Coming at number 28, we got Thor: Love and Thunder. This is very similar to the recent Ant-Man movie that we discussed in that it's a punch to the gut of disappointment. Taika Waititi did an amazing job of balancing that line between humor and still providing some seriousness in Thor Ragnarok. With that, I was excited to see what he could do with this film. And unfortunately, somewhere on that trapeze wire, we've fallen off. And really, it was way too much humor for us to feel any legitimate conflict in the story. And that's really unfortunate. We had a good casting of a villain with Christian Bale being Gore, and that ends up being, he's criminally underused. And Gore actually has really strong and compelling case for why he has motivations. He's had gods in his life that he's believed in that at the end of life have spit in his face and basically shown that the gods are about themselves. Other items that really I struggle with are Thor and Jane Foster relationship. So Jane Foster in the third movie, or when I say missed, I didn't care. Use these flashbacks to try and show some sort of relationship and like the weight behind it, and ultimately to have Jane Foster and Thor's hammer have this connection. And it's all just convenient, but they don't do that. So they're just creating a backstory to be able to fit their plot, and it's really lazy storytelling. At the end, you're getting some emotional scenes. Primarily, you've got Jane Foster who kind of sacrifices herself, and Gore and his daughter with the attempt to like bring her back. And the scene with Gore, that's a much more powerful scene to me than the Jane Foster one. Cinematography that is just on way different sides of the spectrum here. So over here, we've got this rainbow unicorn barfy colorful mess. Over here, we've got black and white, but used differently than Dark World. It's actually, I think, used tastefully for the gore scenes primarily. And coming in at 27, we got Iron Man 3, so I've got more positives to say about this one than Iron Man 2, but it's not too much higher on the list. This at least doesn't have a screaming goat in it, so that's positive. Now, Tony Stark in this, so we're kind of progressing. Iron Man 1, he's cocky, he's smart, he's got this braggadocious attitude about him, and he's fearless. Then going to Iron Man 2, we're seeing that he's struggling to understand the identity between Tony Stark and Iron Man. Now going into Iron Man 3, which is following from Avengers, and we're getting PTSD, we're getting paranoia, and he really makes himself to be a sympathetic character, which is something I never would have imagined that Tony Stark could be. A few things, the attack on his home in particular is such a chilling scene. One of the best cases of utilizing vulnerability with our heroes in a world where they're not very vulnerable unless it's someone that's a godlike being. But the drone shots from above the home, particularly over the water, beautiful. I mean, these are some of the best shot scenes I think I can remember from the MCU, particularly earlier on in this stage. So really impressed with that. But unfortunately, it does run into similar pitfalls of poor villains, in my opinion, yet again. So you start with the Mandarin, who starts from being mysterious and having these strange vignettes. So now we got Killian, who hurt the story. I just don't resonate with that. The final battle has got incredible plot armor that I can't overlook. So Pepper Potts at this point has been injected with this extremist, and Iron Man does everything he can to kill Killian, who of course is powered by extremists. Why wouldn't he be? Even to the point that they blow him up inside an Iron Man suit, and he comes away with it unscathed. So the whole purpose of Pepper Potts being used with this extremist is ultimately to be able to have someone to kill Killian, and I can't overlook. Doesn't even look like Iron Man's done much. Coming in at 26, we got Black Widow. This is a long overdue standalone film for Black Widow, and it's several years too late, unfortunately, that they released this. Positives, what a strong cast. Natasha and Florence Pugh's Yelena have a really fun team up, and just their chemistry jumps off the screen. So really enjoy that. David Harbour as Red Guardian also was a treat. So, good start with that. There's also, you get a really strong understanding of Natasha's upbringing and childhood trauma, and if you actually go go to Avengers Age of Ultron, and you remember that scene between Natasha and Bruce Banner where she's pleading with him to just leave. Let's go somewhere. Let's be together. That scene means a whole heck of a lot more after watching this film. You now understand like where she's coming from to this. She just wants to have a good life. Unfortunately, Bruce Banner runs away from that. But, it's heartbreaking in a sense. So it's interesting that you create this standalone movie, and yet they had the wherewithal to bring a little bit of long-term storytelling in this. Isn't that, these are two characters, Elena and Red Guardian, that are going to be part of Thunderbolts, and I assume part of the universe moving forward. So bravo to them on that. Ultimately, though, this is a formulaic Marvel movie. It's got 4 villains, and it's about an ensemble of team and action, good cast, average plot, and of course, there's a very limited suspense due to us knowing that Black Widow's demise is not going to be coming from a result of this story. It's already happened in Avengers Endgame. So you're limited in the storytelling. Number 25, we got Ant-Man and the Wasp. This was a fun movie. Again, I enjoy Ant-Man movies. I would say this is a typical sequel, and that's going to be a little lesser than the first movie. It's another kind of a heist movie, but it's really like a reverse heist. It's all about a building that happens to be able to get someone into the quantum realm, or at least that's the goal of it. But in this case, they've been stolen from, and they're going to have to get this building back. There's a lot of different antagonists going on, but none of them feel incredibly powerful. I mean, the Ghost is certainly your big one. The way that she can fight is impressive. But ultimately, she's a fine villain. You got sympathy, and ultimately, though, there's nothing game-changing here when it comes to her. It's amazing she didn't use a suit in the first movie, but Hank has gotten past not letting her utilize that part of her expertise, so to say, and she makes for a fun part of this, so really enjoy that. Fun visuals as always with the fighting, especially making things small, making things big.
That's what she said.
There's the one scene in particular, Hope is in slow motion running on a knife that's been thrown at her. That's pretty neat. The movie's plot, though, primarily it's to try and find Hank Pym's wife in the quantum realm. Scott Lang sometimes seems like he's just part of that plot out of convenience rather than it being an organic story, and they don't trust Scott. So to a storytelling perspective, I suppose what's cool is he does gain their trust by the end. Of course, the fun scene with the truth serum is just like perfect. No, 24 is going to be Doctor Strange. Now, my first run through with this, or at least my first thoughts of ranking this, I had it probably a bit lower, about 26, but I did have to add in some cinematography aspect to this, and that some beautiful scenes. They do a really nice job with some of the action, kind of the ways you're able to manipulate the setting, and color-wise, I'd say the color grading's pretty nice. But ultimately, this is a very common formulaic movie in the terms of similar plot issues. There's villains that are less than ideal, and that's even with Mads Mikkelsen being the villain, who I absolutely adore. He plays terrific villains, and they make him more of a cult leader in the end of this than a strong villain to superheroes, and they kind of cut the legs out from under him by at the end saying you're a soldier in this battle with Dormammu. So not a huge fan of that. Doctor Strange, oddly enough, I don't connect with very much. You get from him at the beginning of the movie, he is an asshole doctor. He has got time for nobody in his life. He pushes people away. He's extremely egotistical to a degree that I'm not sure Tony Stark could even match. He gets into a car accident. He no longer used these hands that produce magic and surgery, but it will never in lovemaking. There's no woman that's going after him. He's insufferable almost. So Benedict Cumberbatch does a great job in this role. I would say the intrigue is more he's trying to help himself, but ends up being he's going to become a wizard.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Not a fan of that part. So it's lower on my list. At number 23, this is going to be a shocker for some. I've got Captain Marvel. I'm sure people are screaming at their screens already saying, how is this not at like 31, 32? It's where I see it in plenty of other lists. I can see it to a degree. I don't know if I see this part of the franchise having much of a future, but with that being said, there are a few storytelling techniques and uses that I think had brought this further up. Of course, they've made Captain Marvel look like the most powerful member of what in the future is going to be her in the Avengers, you assume, and that's exactly right. She's very powerful. She's still kind of in training mode, and that always makes for a little more interest when heroes not just all the way up here in competency. You want to see a gradual rise in that. They also have the double turn. That's a wrestling term here. You've got your good guys, what you assume is the Kree. You've got your bad guys being the Skrulls, and what ends up being is a complete reverse of that. So you now learn that the Skrulls, they're just trying to get home, and the Kree are consistently fucking that up. And that is very rarely well told storytelling, I think, that the MCU does, to be able to completely flip who we're seeing as good and evil. And so for that alone, I'm putting this pretty high on the list. Coming in number 22, we've got Doctor Strange and the Multitude of Madness. This is another movie that will give some kudos points for trying to do something different. So kudos to Sam Raimi for creating something that's, I'm not going to say full-on horror, but, they're edging toward that along with thriller as well. And Scarlet Witch becomes the absolute perfect antagonist for a movie like this. The cinematography is another job well done with the Doctor Strange movie, I think, especially with some of the darkness scenes. Now, where you're going to rate this film is going to be strongly indicative of how you feel about the multiverse. I've actually read this, that there wasn't a whole lot of multiverse action in this. This, to me, is a huge, huge slap in the face of multiverse. And for me, that's not my favorite mode of storytelling. It's not my favorite era of the MCU, but it's there. They've brought you into this new world with the Illuminati, which I think is a very strange use, and all of them just get mowed over by Scarlet Witch. But again, it's how you view the multiverse might determine, is your ranking going to be more in the 16s, 15s? Is it going to be further down in the 30s? And for me, it's at 22. Elizabeth Olsen, though, performance is legitimately maybe top 3 villain performances in the MCU at this point. She's delusional, but she's got this motivation, of course, to get back to her kids, and she's willing to do anything to get there. But if this is her last movie, it was a phenomenal exit. At number 21, I'm going to disappoint some people. It's Deadpool and Wolverine. And before you get on me here, I enjoyed this movie immensely. The bye fight sequence to start, chef's kiss. It's the usual Deadpool movie. It's that R-rated humor, which, at this point, you're inserting this in the MCU. It's now the funniest movie in the MCU. It's entertaining for the entire runtime. So I love that. It's a perfect buddy movie. The use of Deadpool and Wolverine is fantastic. Great to bring Hugh Jackman back into the fold. Welcome to the MCU. This movie is never about having the greatest plot and running from A to B and trying to break records. It's certainly not going to come anywhere close to the IMDb's top 250 list. I think that needs to be taken into account. Really heavy-handed with cameos. It's about gory action. It's about the humor. And so that's why, I'm putting it at 21. Fantastic use of the film. I would gladly go watch it again and look forward to seeing Deadpool and Wolverine hopefully in the future. But I'm not going to put it any higher than that. Number 20, I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I'll try not to repeat myself for each of their entries, but the visuals with all 3 of these movies are fantastic. They know how to utilize space settings better than anything else in the MCU. It's a strong soundtrack, and they go even one step further than creating a strong soundtrack for this. They actually utilize and reference the soundtrack in the movie, and I find that to be incredibly powerful storytelling. Mantis did a great job. She's really a fun part of the crew and really seems natural for them. You get Baby Groot, so Groot's not new, but we get Baby Groot. Yondu is written beautifully in this movie. His death is one of the sadder ones I can remember, plus the memorial at the end with the Ravagers adds more emotion, but we're now understanding how him and Peter Quill got together in the first place. His motivations for keeping Peter was not really stealing it all, but, deciding I do not want to give another kid to Ego like he's given to others. Where this gets a little bit lower for me is the second act really is slow, in my opinion. So we get onto Ego's planet, kind of learning more about him, and Peter Quill's fallen into that trap of being in awe of his dad. But, it just drags, unfortunately, and I can't put it higher than that. Ego's also not my favorite villain, and Ego is being one of my favorite villains. It's not going to be the case. Coming at number 19, I've got Avengers Age of Ultron. This is really the last time you're going to see the OG Avengers by themselves before this group is going to rapidly expand in the next 2 to 3 years at this point in time. Kicks off with an exciting action sequence, closes with visual proof of how powerful Wanda is going to be in this universe. She provides the viewers that prophetic look at how the MCU is going to be moving forward through the vision that she puts in Tony Stark's head. Speaking of vision, he's introduced in this film, and while we don't get a whole lot of character arc from him or even maybe a whole lot of development, it is that introduction, and we're going to see him further on in these movies. My favorite scene is the scene in New York where all your Avengers are just chilling, they're drinking. War Machine is just telling the same story over and over again, and he's trying to be funny. The big one is everyone trying to lift Thor's hammer. His face when Captain America is trying to lift it, you can tell he's actually nervous for that one. And that has future payoff. That's storytelling that's going to have future payoff in later films, and I think that's brilliant. I've got a different opinion on Ultron that I feel like I've heard from others. I don't don't find him to be an interesting antagonist at all. He, at many times, is preaching to the viewers on how humans are living wrong on the earth and how they need a reset and that robots should be taking over this planet ultimately. Motivation of destroying the world is incredibly cliche. And so he basically is coming off to me as part Robert California, part Terminator, and I don't enjoy it. Unfortunately, this is going to be unfair to compare this to the first Avengers and future Avengers movies, but we have to. It's human nature, and I can't put this any higher than 19. Coming in at 18, I've got Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. This is stunning visuals, and I enjoyed more. The Maya were fun to learn about. I would say their mystique in the first half of the movie is probably greater emotion felt than when we start seeing more of them, unfortunately. I mean, they're badass, but, you know, Namor feels invincible, but there's eventually a solve there. So, you know, it's fine. I enjoyed him, though, as a character. You know, unfortunately, this film is hamstrung by Chadwick Boseman's death, and they do a brilliant job of trying to rehash and honoring his character while also, I think, making the correct call not to fully replace the Black Panther. I don't see her being that full Black Panther, but we could be wrong. I feel like they'll find a replacement, but she does it, you know, it feels more out of necessity than anything, and she does a good job of it. And Shuri's story is very well told. She's got her brother's death, which is still very raw on the emotions, and then her mother's death is going to add further layers to that grief. And so that's fine storytelling. Really enjoy it. It's introducing Riri Williams, who looks like it's going to be Ironheart. There's enough intrigue there. We haven't seen the payoff for that yet, and that's fine. So overall, I enjoyed the film. I believe it's flawed, middle of the pack MCU, and nothing better than that. Coming in at 17, I've got Ant-Man, and this is a movie that blew my expectations out of the water. You know, the casting of Paul Rudd gave me doubts. Is this meant to be a comedic movie? I wasn't sure. They needed a very strong introduction on the character, and they delivered big time. Now, a fun part for a movie like this is they gave ample amount of time showing Scott Lang being trained to be Ant-Man. This is not something where you can just come into it and understand, I'm going to press this button, get miniature, or run really small, then get big and kick. You know, it takes some nuance to it. There's some other films that I feel like would have maybe given half the time, and I think that wouldn't have been a good call. So, you know, very effective, and not just for him to be able to be Ant-Man, but to be able to control the ants with his mind. I think a very appropriate build of the Ant-Man character. Now, adding on to that, you get him getting one over on the Avengers and Sam Wilson in particular, but they go to the Avengers headquarters in New York, he steals something, and a fantastic way to build the character even more. So kudos to them. Now, really nice casting in this. Michael Douglas and Michael Pena, who hadn't been utilized too well in the past, and this first one, perfect use for both of them. This is a different MCU feel. It's a well-told heist movie, and it's got some humor, it's got some action, deviation from the standard formula. And then Darren Cross is, I'm going to say, a fine antagonist, maybe nothing too special, but there is that family connection, so there's something personal between, you know, the Pyms and him taking over, you know, the Pym organization and then trying to make public the Ant-Man formula, which is, you know, ultimately what Hank Pym has not wanted for 20, 30 years at that point. So well done there. The connection between Scott and Cassie is so heartwarming in these first two Ant-Mans, this one in particular. Wouldn't say the stakes feel as important in the MCU as how many other films would be in this franchise. Coming at number 16, it's the first Captain America. So Captain America, the first Avenger. I will just tell you right now, Captain America is in my top 3 character list in the whole MCU. From the start, they show his moral compass. They show his drive, wanting to be able to defend his country. It's clear. So just off the bat, strong character motivation. He becomes the perfect recipient for the super soldier serum. And so, you know, they've done a great job building him. It's fun to see Bucky Barnes in a role like this. I actually never imagined he'd have such an important role in the MCU coming off of this first film. And I think if you live under a rock, or if you just had no idea what this was and you watch this film, you might say, all right, he's kind of cool, but there's emotion there when he dies, or, you know, what you think is dying. They did a nice job at that. Unfortunately, where this movie falls for me is going to be the second act. The second act is really poorly used. It's weak, in my opinion. Captain America is not even used to fight. He's used to recruit more soldiers. And I know part of this is you're trying to build for him to actually start fighting, and maybe it's a little weird for him to get the soldier serum and then just immediately start fighting. But at the expense of making us watch 45 minutes, probably to an hour of a second act, that is not very enjoyable in my opinion. Another uninteresting villain. I'm not a fan of Red Skull. He's got his eyes on the Tesseract, so a good way to introduce what's going to be a very important item in the MCU for quite some time, but he feels like a copycat of historical figures rather than an original idea, in my opinion. Now, Captain America's sacrifice at the end of the film is an absolutely perfect way to show what he's willing to do for others. A second act and a villain that are holding this back. Number 15, I've got Thor. I think many people might switch my original films of Captain America and Thor. I find Thor to be a little bit of a better film, and some of that might very well be the villains in this, Loki in particular being in his tweener stage, frankly going full antagonist by the end of this, and Loki is one of the top villains in the MCU. So we're getting a start for him, and now we split our time between Asgard and Earth. The Asgard scenes are beautiful cinematography. We're getting just an incredible look at this place. Earth, we're in New Mexico. There's, you can polish a turd all you want, it's still a turd, but strong acting. I mean, look at the cast: Chris Hemsworth, Tom Hiddleston, Anthony Hopkins, Natalie Portman, Idris Elba. I mean, my gosh, it's tough to beat a cast like that. So Thor looks powerful for most of this film, and then all of a sudden he's got this redemption arc where he doesn't even have the ability to use his hammer, and he doesn't have his power. So we're getting a redemption arc, which is a fine storytelling method that is utilized here. But ultimately, Loki working both sides, showing how threatening he is when he works in the shadows is such a high point for me, even if I think there's some uneven pacing with the two settings in this film. At number 14, I've got Thor Ragnarok, and this is, as we discussed with the Thor Love and Thunder entry of this, a film that almost perfectly walks the line between funny, silly, and serious. They took a page from the Guardians of the Galaxy playbook. Chris Hemsworth also, he does a phenomenal job with playing well with that new creative direction, and frankly, he just looks natural in a movie like this. Physically, they cut his hair, and I don't think he's ever looked more like a badass than with that short hair. So there's some fun cinematography. This is, again, we're probably getting a little towards some bright lights, but it doesn't quite get to that Love and Thunder level yet. So I'd say primarily some good cinematography, good music choices. Hulk versus Thor is incredible. In terms of antagonists, this is where we bring Hela in, and she's an absolute badass. And what a phenomenal entry into the universe for her. I mean, it's probably the best use of Idris Elba's character, in my opinion. And the fact that he's not even with Thor, but it's through those, the way that they're able to converse through minds, cross worlds, very impressive. How Idris Elba is kind of working underground to save as many citizens of Asgard as he can is fun. And the conclusion of this, how Thor and Loki and them get off the planet through Devil's Anus is very interesting. In fact, I take trips there every time I eat spicy wings. But in all seriousness, the way that they conclude this they make Hela look like a badass and almost unbeatable, and so you kind of wonder how in the world are they going to beat her. They tie back to the very beginning, and that's unleashing Ragnarok on Asgard, and it's brilliant. They kill two birds with one stone, and Hela doesn't even die by Thor or anything. They don't make it be a cheap death. Very impressive. I think they did a nice job with that. Number 13, I have Shang-Chi in The Legend of the Ten Rings. It's an entertaining story throughout the runtime. It's a different feel. We've gone away from a sci-fi superhero and more into a fantasy story. Strong use of Asian culture throughout this movie. And from the main characters, the acting is really good. So Simu Liu, his stock has skyrocketed, and Awkwafina, I felt played a fairly fun sidekick. I know she can kind of annoy some. She annoys my wife. Fine character, I think, and good ensemble. Strong plot. It's a family story. Keeps emotion intact. Keeps it strong and tight.
That's what she said.
Doesn't get distracted. In fact, having the antagonist be Shang-Chi's father, who is he's distracted and he's dangerous as a result of their mother's death, really is a fantastic, easy character arc and motivation to understand, even if he is a bit delusional with some of it. Fun action scenes, the bus fight scene at the beginning, and then the final battle with some dragons and cool fantasy-like creatures are very intriguing. And so they kept the mystique of the Ten Rings throughout this film to the point that, frankly, it's been 3-4 years since that came out, and I'm wanting a sequel. Number 12, we got Spider-Man Far From Home. As you may have noticed, we have not discussed a Spider-Man movie up until this point, so that bodes well for the quality of these movies. This one is actually a straggler in Phase 4. The reason for that, you actually see this movie does an outstanding job of utilizing Tony Stark's death. It still feels fresh at this point. This movie not only does a nice job following Endgame, but also does a great job reducing the scope. We're going from 2 years in a row of absolutely massive releases to let's go back to a standalone for a hero and we need to reduce it. Fantastic development of Peter and MJ's relationships. So Zendaya is getting a much more front and center role in this movie. The European setting, it was fine. Spider-Man really feels at home in his neighborhood. He's the neighborhood Spider-Man. He's basically MCU's version of Mr. Rogers. Jake Gyllenhaal, strong actor, so putting him in as Mysterio and having that twist, ending that first act, showing that he's going to be our antagonist moving forward. Plot-wise, this really comes down to a pair of glasses. And of course, he feels unworthy and he gives them to Jake Gyllenhaal and then starts this whole plot up. So it feels a little bit silly, but also in a way, you can create a whole plot with just a pair of glasses. In a way, that's impressive to the MCU. So bravo to them. The ending of this is the identity of Peter Parker being revealed to the world. This is going to be a big slap in the face to what he's going to have to do moving forward. So this really is the first domino in a plot that's going to lead right into No Way Home. This, like many of the other Spider-Man movies, has got some good vibes, and so that's why we got it at number 12. Now we're going to stick with the Spider-Man theme here. Number 11, Spider-Man Homecoming. So this is the first of the three. Already been introduced to Spider-Man in the MCU. He came in a year earlier in Captain America Civil War and did a very nice job in that. We already can kind of see the development of what that personality is going to look like. It's going to be a bunch of jokes. It's going to be him not being able to shut up and annoying all the grown-ups in the room. This movie is giving us the introduction to Peter Parker. This follows one of the better formulas with the MCU, which would be the Avenger in training or the superhero in training story. So we're getting Spider-Man here pretty early in development. Stories like this are so easy to show flaws. To me, it makes for a more interesting story moving forward. Tom Holland is a strong Spider-Man. Marissa Tomei is a phenomenal Aunt May, maybe a little too good looking for the role. Marissa Tomei and Tom Holland and their characters already within a couple minutes showed this depth I don't think many people could have pulled off, and so really nice job with that. This movie utilizes the Avengers from 5 years earlier because our antagonist, Michael Keaton's Vulture, has lost his job to federal contract. As someone that's been laid off from a job before, I understand where they're coming from this. It's a pretty easy motivation. Not to say I've broken the law for since doing that. Don't agree with the means. The motivation behind this character was strong. They utilized the technology from Avengers, drops a whole heck of a lot of technology. It's not something we think about. It's like, hey, this alien race comes. They leave a bunch of stuff. Most movies would leave that and forget about it. This movie utilizes it. That material is being used to power the Vulture and his group. I think it's fantastic. Vulture also identifies Peter Parker. So this is the first case of quickly showing him how dangerous the superhero game can be. Another movie, tight, small scope, elevated though with some occasional cameos from Tony Stark and Happy that they're done appropriately well, and it's starting off what is going to be a nice build between those three characters working together. Now let's go into a movie that I just discussed in that last entry. So number 10 is the original Avengers movie from 2012. This is our first holy shit experience of the MCU. The reveal of this was massive. Fans weren't sure if this is something that could actually be pulled off. Marvel in general in the background of this, also not sure if they could have gotten this pulled off. It was a fun viewing experience. It's a movie I will never have an issue rewatching. Opening scene is Loki really wrecking house. He even controls Hawkeye. Really, what a stunning, fantastic opening. Loki's going to further this plot even when he's being captured. He gets on absolutely everyone's nerves, so he's showing the psychological aspect of this that I'm not sure that we get enough of with MCU movies. He doesn't even have to lift a finger to get them to start fighting. This movie, at the end of the day, is an epitome of Loki's involvement, of why, to me, I think he's underrated. Final battle scene feels massive. And not just in the first watch, each subsequent one. To a degree, it's going to ignore the damage it does to this beautiful, massive city, as most superhero movies do, but it won't be ignored in a future entry that we'll discuss, and so I really enjoyed that. I'd say one minor flaw we might have with this is going to be some slight uneven character development, which is something that's bound to happen when you have this many people together. This movie was always about getting your favorite heroes together and showing you what that experience looks like. So number 9, we're going to finish off the Spider-Mans. Here's the Spider-Man No Way Home. A rare example, for me, of the multiverse being used in fun, positive ways. We get a lot of prior Superman heroes, villains, and fun characters overall that people have enjoyed over the last 20 years at this point. This can be the danger with the multiverse. To me, these were purposeful cameos, and that is the difference between this and many other examples or practices that a multiverse is going to create. I enjoyed Doctor Strange more in a cameo role like this than in his own standalone films. Peter Parker's character development is strong. This is a maturation that I haven't seen too much. He's been revealed in the previous movie, as we already discussed, by Mysterio. Aunt May passes away. While we get into a mess with him not wanting people to forget who he is, and that ultimately drives this whole plot, he does get there at the end. He understands this is more than just me and what I want in my life. And so he has to make the decision for Doctor Strange to erase everyone's mind. It's a sad thought. I'll be curious to see how they build on that in Spider-Man 4. It adds some incredible intrigue, but incredible maturation, once again, of Peter Parker. Willem Dafoe. Anytime I see him in a movie, I perk up a little bit. He, once again, does a fantastic job. He's what I would consider really the primary antagonist of this is Goblin. I know there's a few others that kind of get their hits in, but this is Goblin leading the charge. Plot not entirely original, in my opinion. I do find it slightly cliched. It's a messing with time. That's really my one flaw in this, and why maybe I don't have this higher on the list. So got Spider-Man No Way Home at number 9. Number 8, we've got Iron Man. It's the original Marvel movie. It started it all. I remember watching as a 12-year-old in the theaters and certainly had no idea that this was going to be the kickstart of a large franchise that to this day is something that I still enjoy putting some time into. What many people may not remember, Iron Man was not a huge hero at this point. So this is a big risk for Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Tony Stark is the absolute perfect hero to get this started with. You get to see him in that cave building what's going to become the thought of Iron Man. Everything from start to finish is pretty riveting. Progression as well. This is another, you could call it Avenger in training, so to speak. We certainly see Tony Stark not quite understanding the suit yet. There's a lot to learn. The ending fight scene, I think, does a good job because it's showing both Tony Stark and Ironmonger flawed. And flawed not by their expertise, not by their minds, but the lack of time that they've really gotten to experiment with this. I think that could have easily been ignored. We could have seen 2 superpowers go into 100, and that wouldn't have been realistic. Going back to Ironmonger, I personally am a bit underwhelmed by this antagonist. I think it left a bit to be desired, and maybe this movie was never meant to have an antagonist to truly propel things. But again, this is really a movie that's meant to be a kick-ass superhero with cheeky humor. It starts up the MCU. Coming in at number 7, we've got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. My bingo card did not include feeling sympathy for Rocket Raccoon, but nonetheless, here we are, and another almost masterpiece by James Gunn in terms of storytelling. We see some good character development. Of course, Mantis and Drax have that fun, quirky relationship that's good for 3-5 laughs in a movie. Incredibly fun fight scenes. That's something that's a given in these Guardians movies. The long hallway scene in particular, a nice homage to this group after 3 movies. They all get a little bit of time in the sun, get to see what they're able to do, and they do it in this fun slow-mo. It's a hoot. The flashbacks of Rocket were the most impactful imagery that this movie provides. It's twofold, giving us sympathy for Rocket and making us really dislike the High Evolutionary to be able to do this awful things to these poor animals. This is an old-school villain where there's not a single ounce of coolness that we're meant to feel for this. This is a bad guy that we really want to see Rocket get his comeuppance for. A couple things I have mixed feelings about. One's going to be Will Poulter's character, Adam Warlock. Begins it as really this monster who completely takes out all of our Guardians, really does some damage on Nowhere, which comes the adoptive home of the Guardians at this point. He's set up as quite a threat, and then for the second act of the movie, I'd say he's a little more than a follower. You know, he's lurking in the background, but he's also talked down to by his mom, and that takes the knees out from him. Then you get to a final act, and we learn what his purpose was for, and it's to save Peter Quill. That gets to my next slight dislike here. We've now seen Peter Quill in 3 movies barely scrape by and cling to life. We know he's important to the MCU, but this could have been a highly impactful death because at this point, I'm not sure I'm expecting many of my heroes to die. We knew Captain America, we knew Iron Man, we knew those would happen eventually, but they could do with a few more surprises. Otherwise, the drama is going to be at about a 7 out of 10 for me. Ultimately, this is a fantastic finish to the Guardians franchise, and I think they can hold their heads up high when there's many other films that have been made from 2020 to present that are struggling, and to think that this is one of the few that I can actually put as high as 7 on a list. Now, of course, I don't want to give you guys any sort of blue balls necessarily, and so let's just jump into number 6, which is Guardians of the Galaxy. Speaking of blue balls, I'm guessing that's what Yondu's got. Nice pair of them, and guess what? What a fantastic gray character. Again, one of those tweeners. He's pretty much bad, but he's going to start floating towards good. He's very conflicted. I love conflicted characters. He creates a strong subplot to this movie. Guardians has an amazing first scene. It's combining some music, some fun, eventually some action, but you couldn't have used Chris Pratt in a better way. And really it encapsulates the entire vibe of what these movies are meant to be, which are the fun soundtracks, the good action, fairly lighthearted to a degree, but yet will bring some intensity, of course. A strong way to introduce us to be like, hey, what can Groot do? What can Rocket do? What can Gamora do? What can Peter do? They're not together. Well, let's have them all fight each other for an object. I mean, it's simple, but hey, now we know what each are capable of. Put them in jail, get them to have this common purpose of, hey, what would we like to do? How about get out of jail and sell this object for loads of money? It makes sense to me. Now, at point of release, Ronan felt like a much bigger deal. He's our antagonist for this movie. As we've gotten more movies, he's definitely paled in comparison to particular Thanos. Now, Thanos already gives him a bit of a kick in the shin with the way he talks to him. Still, he's got an Infinity Stone. He exudes some sort of power. We're going to go skip to the end here. It's effective when it comes to how it uses some of its characters. Groot in particular, his sacrifice, and we find out how he can use his body to do so. Rocket's boldness with how he destroys a ship, but is using it as a catalyst that what he thinks is going to end the game here. Going into this ending here, I think it's slightly convoluted way that you're trying to end Ronan. It's everyone kumbaya in a circle, holding hands, based love and friendship is gonna win the day. Ultimately, it's an Infinity Stone that is going to get the job done. Overall, though, highly entertaining, strong character development, about the highest you can get in the MCU. Fun cast, and one of the best soundtracks that you're going to listen to in a movie. Bravo to the Guardians. Really, we're going to miss them. At number 5, we're going back to my guy. It's Captain America Civil War, and just look at this, man. Bravo, Chris Evans. Bra fucking O. This movie's built on the Sokovia Accords, a way to create checks and balances for heroes, which in one sense sounds incredibly stupid, but another goes, this world's got governments, and why would they want these people to go and cause mayhem on the world? I can kind of agree with that. This is another great use of mixing storytelling, conflict, and of course the action, which Marvel's wanting. Plot-wise, we've got some mystery in when you're in that first act, start of the second act. Did Winter Soldier bomb the UN? Also, we've got this guy in the periphery, Zemo. What are his motivations? He's casually dropping into people's homes and hanging them upside down and drowning them. That's unusual behavior. Several points of conflict, which creates some phenomenal intrigue. We've already addressed the Winter Soldier part. We then get an introduction to Black Panther, who at this point looks a little more of an antagonist, definitely someone who has some ill will in their mind. And then, of course, Iron Man versus Captain America. That's the conflict that is on the poster. It's a buffet of here's some Iron Man, Captain America, introduction to Spider-Man, amazing. He's just annoying the shit out of everybody. He's tangling people up. He's asking Tony Stark for advice and stuff. Mid-fights, just a perfect start to Spider-Man. Was the fighting conclusive with anything? No, of course not. You can't really have anyone win that fight. But they gave us the taste, and that taste was amongst the most satisfying tastes I've ever had watching an MCU movie. Let's go back to Zemo. He's one of the most impressive antagonists I can think of with this universe. You might be asking me, what's impressive about him? No powers, nothing to really stand a chance against these heroes. And I think that is the point. He's able to create incredible conflict and turmoil within the Avengers. He drives an incredible wedge. I find Zemo, he does his job. Absolutely 100% does his job. The final image of broken Iron Man, Cap's shield, is the image that I want to leave us with before moving on. Number 4, I've got Avengers Endgame. So this is the second leg of the Avengers and Thanos saga. Get several early surprises. The blip results in a 5-year time gap, which I didn't know how that direction was going to go, but I think it was the right call. Loads of characters are now gone because of the blip. They've disappeared. They're part of that half. This results in a tighter knit cast, something that we haven't seen for quite a few years now. The first Thanos death, I was stunned. You'd have to check your clock watch. 25 minutes in, maybe? Very weighty character changes, and that was not meant to be a pun to Thor's weight, but we might as well go there. It's a little bit of a bizarre image to see. I think more weird than his weight gain is his attitude change. Lazy's not actually the word for Thor here. He no longer wants to have the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's had that for thousands of years. He wants to just chill out. Hulk permanently being green and bigger, oddly enough, makes him less intimidating. You're getting Bruce Banner and Hulk body, and it's funky. What they've done to Hulk really in the last 2 Avengers movies are very bizarre. Hawkeye, he's an absolute nut throughout this. Probably could be a really fun movie if you were just to watch him go nuts on everybody. It's like Sicario revved up to 17. And then we got Tony Stark, the Family Man, who's also initially not not wanting to try and help the world. Time machine plot, that's been done before. It's a bit of an overdone plot device to the point that characters in this movie rattle off the movies that have used this. Now, with that being said, it did create nostalgia. You got to see some old events, but from some different POVs. Of course, got to see some slight alterations as a result of their actions. Captain America versus Captain America fight was interesting and enjoyable. We got to see that Chris Evans look of fondness towards his own ass, something I think we all wish we could do. My wife says I have America's ass, though, so it's got the appropriate amount of humor throughout. At this point, Marvel Studios understands what they're doing. Final battle, everything in the end has fairly satisfying finish. I do think it's fairly satisfying, though. I think you could argue throughout this whole universe, why isn't Captain Marvel involved more? She's just obvious plot armor that we described earlier. The fact that she comes in, just flies through Thanos' ship, and it's gone. Why did we have to go through all of this trouble in 2 movies? You could say that. Let's not be skeptical, though. These are fun movies. It's a proper conclusion to the Infinity Era. Almost end, practically with 2 of our characters giving their farewells. Tony Stark funeral, Cap retiring. That hits the feels for a Marvel fan. Top 3, baby. Here we go. Bronze medal number 3 is going to Black Panther. Some of the best visuals that you're going to see in the MCU. It's become quickly one of my favorite stories because of how culturally impactful it's become. It feels like much more than just go to a movie and watch a superhero do his thing. This has a much broader impact. Think about how many sports stars did you see do the Wakanda Forever. The technological advances, incredible to see. It didn't feel totally unrealistic. They knew what they were doing. Now, strong cast, and not just a strong cast, but strong performances. Michael B. Jordan, his Killmonger, is a great villain, understandable and justified reason to, and not to use this term loosely, but hate. He does not like what happened to his father, doesn't warrant the amount of people that he's killed, but his feelings make a whole hell of a lot of sense. I'd like to go back to Chadwick Boseman because it is a bit sad to think about these movies now and his passing. I think Marvel saw him being the hero that would lead us past Captain America and Iron Man, and unfortunately life did not want that to be the case. But let's appreciate what he did. He's the absolute perfect Black Panther, and I think this is going to be a legacy that's going to be larger than most things that the MCU is going to create. Soundtrack, Kendrick Lamar, let's get him involved. Everything here was one of the most perfect movies that you could have come up with, and it's one that I'll revisit in a heartbeat anytime you ask me to. So we've reached the point now where you're probably wondering what's going to be number 1, what's going to be number 2. Number 1 to me is Captain America Winter Soldier. So we'll jump back to that. Let's talk about 2. Number 2 is Avengers Infinity War. About as perfect of a movie as you're going to get with a bloated cast. The runtime goes by in a hurry. It's surprising to think this thing's a little under 3 hours, but is nonstop fun. Beautifully shot scenes, particularly scenes in Wakanda. Captain America's entrance. Train goes by. He comes out of the darkness. Bearded Captain America. I think that's the best iteration. The best bits of this are the random character groupings that we get. Thor and the Guardians are a match made in heaven. Thor with Groot and Rocket Raccoon, fucking amazing. Iron Man meeting the remaining Guardians. At this point, Thanos is immediately a badass, and Marvel has understood how to introduce their antagonists at this point. Arguably your best villain die to what's now the new best villain. We're gonna jump, because I think you've all seen this movie. I don't need to explain too much. The ending is brutal, and that's really where I differentiate Endgame from Infinity War. Endgame is a great conclusion, but Infinity War is the most jarring, is nuts. Just half of your favorite heroes gone. They lost. They don't lose too often, and that makes an impact. Ultimately, what they're meant to give us was emotional impact, entertainment, and they get a 10 out of 10 with that. And that's why Avengers Infinity War is the number 2 movie in the MCU. But with that being said, number 1 to me is Captain America Winter Soldier. And the reason I've got this up here is because it's a different feel from the rest of the MCU. We've gone away from the formula. This is a political thriller. It's got some spy aspects to it as well. And the storytelling here is layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. We've got a government imploding. S.H.I.E.L.D. is really losing a grip. They're giving viewers the first glimpse of Captain America really distrusting who he works for. For 5 years of movies is going to have some underlying factor in Captain America's motivations. And you could argue that something like this is going to lead into some conflict in Civil War. Winter Soldier is a ton of fun to watch. He's one of my favorite characters, whether it be Bucky Barnes or Winter Soldier. This iteration, though, being a little cold and, more of a killer, is the best viewing of Bucky Barnes for me. The development of him, though, learning about who he was and the relationship that he has with Captain America over a 70-year span is really strongly developed. Really good acting in this movie. Scarlett Johansson's character, we're giving proper respect to Black Widow that Iron Man 2 certainly did not provide. Introduction of Anthony Mackie's Falcon, who to this day I think is a pretty enjoyable character. Anthony Mackie's done a nice job. This is the most effective Samuel L. Jackson performance in the MCU. This is not him just being a voice box, just like what he was for Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. This was him actually showing a hell of a lot of grit. I don't think it's come close to there's nothing that can really beat this involvement. Maybe the Captain Marvel movie to a degree. Chris Evans, he knows what he's doing with Captain America. He understands the character. You couldn't have asked for a much better performance from him either. Fight scenes are great. Initial one, the DC streets, where we get to basically see Winter Soldier be highlighted, is strong. The villains, there's several of them. Winter Soldier's being an enigma, but it's Alex Pierce and Hydra that are the true antagonists of this. The people in the shadows. Watching this and really the movie simmer with conflict between Nick Fury and Alex Pierce, that's where we bring the political aspect of this into play. If there's anything rough that you can say about this movie, perhaps it is the final battle with the helicarriers that are lining their guns up on citizens. And then we get a fight between Captain America and Winter Soldier, which leads to Winter Soldier, potentially inexplicably saving Captain America. It doesn't make much sense maybe in the moment, but that's where you have to say, it's storytelling. It's for the future. That's a nitpick I can give you. But otherwise, because of how different this movie is, and because it's not a formulaic movie, that's all we're asking for. Give us a little more of that. Captain America, bravo to you. You've got my favorite movie in the MCU. Don't let it get to your head. I've still got America's ass.